Alô. Bom, boa noite a todos. Eu sou o Thiago Nogueira, o editor da revista ZUM e coordenador da área de fotografia contemporânea aqui do MS. Queria agradecer muito a presença de todos vocês neste início de festival da revista ZUM, um festival que acontece todos os anos para discutir fotografia e imagem de uma forma geral, de várias maneiras, e não só com artistas, mas também com pessoas como pensadores, como é o caso da Ariella e da Lilia, que estão aqui. A gente vai ter uma programação que começa hoje à noite e continua pelo sábado e pelo domingo. Para quem não viu ainda a programação, tem um folhetinho com tudo que vai acontecer, em linhas muito gerais, né? Amanhã, às 11 da manhã, tem uma conversa com editores e autores de fotolivros na biblioteca, a partir de uma convocatória de publicações que a gente fez ao longo deste ano. Depois, à tarde, às 3 da tarde, tem uma mesa com o Eustáquio Neves, a Dora Longo Bahia e... tudo de cabeça. E o Tobias Zeloni, que é um artista alemão que está aqui na plateia, mediado pela Susana Velasco. É uma mesa que vai discutir as imagens e deslocamentos de populações e de imagens no mundo contemporâneo. A gente continua com uma conversa às 5 da tarde, chamada Tão Longe, Tão Perto, com a artista Rosângela Renault, a Aleta Valente e o Vincent Catalá, mediados pela professora Ivana Bentes, para discutir também a ideia de centro e de periferia, de quem transmite a imagem de quem produz imagem sobre quem, a partir desses 3 artistas e de uma produção localizada no Rio de Janeiro. E às 7 da noite de amanhã a gente tem também uma grande fala muito bacana com Paulo Bruschi, um artista que vocês conhecem, que vai contar um pouco sobre a relação dele com a fotografia, que eu mesmo não sabia. Ele foi criado pelo pai num estúdio de fotografia, então o pai dele tinha um laboratório, né, de fotografia, e ele diz que a fotografia é uma grande influência na trajetória dele, e ele vem aqui dividir um pouco essa relação com a gente. As atividades continuam no domingo, tem uma oficina com o artista Moisés Patrício, uma oficina também com o Tobias Zeloni e uma conversa com a bolsista da ZUM, Aline Mota, que está concluindo o trabalho da Bolsa de Fotografia. Ao longo do fim de semana também tem uma feira de livros no térreo aqui do IMS, com vários artistas e pequenas editoras que produzem fotolivros e que vão vender, vão discutir suas produções. Tem também uma feira de fotografia analógica, que vai acontecer aqui na praça do IMS, e tem, ao longo de todo o dia, uma parceria que a gente fez esse ano pela primeira vez com o Vídeo Brasil, que é uma apresentação contínua de vídeos do acervo do Vídeo Brasil, selecionados pelo IMS. Isso vai acontecer na sala de aula e fica rodando sábado e domingo. O festival tem um apoio muito importante também do Goethe, do Instituto Goethe, que foi quem nos ajudou a trazer tanto a Ariella quanto o Tobias, então eu queria agradecer muito ao Goethe pela parceria e ao Vídeo Brasil também pela parceria na projeção dos filmes. Para concluir só, hoje o festival inteiro, mas hoje especialmente é o lançamento da revista, que acabou de chegar da gráfica. A revista traz com exclusividade 5 pequenos ensaios, não tão pequenos assim na verdade, da Ariella Azoulay, que resume de uma certa forma um pouco do que ela vai falar aqui e o que é o novo livro dela que sai esse mês nos Estados Unidos. Traz várias outras matérias interessantes, uma entrevista que a gente fez com o fotógrafo de guerra Tom McCullin, um perfil da fotógrafa Dora Maar, que tem uma grande retrospectiva rodando o mundo, as fotos do Vincent Catalá, um fotógrafo francês que vem fotografando o Rio de Janeiro há alguns anos, um fotógrafo contemporâneo chinês também que está fotografando a sua cidade, chamado Feng Li, matérias sobre imagens de escravidão na coleção do IMS, a partir do acervo do Marc Ferrez, num texto escrito pelo Hélio Menezes, uma matéria sobre também fotografia e tortura, feita pelo Maurício Lissovski, pela jornalista Ana Maria Mauad. Então, enfim, é uma edição bem recheada. Eu espero que vocês tenham a oportunidade de ver a revista e de apoiar esse projeto. Eu queria, então, agradecer muito às duas pessoas que estão nessa mesa, pessoas, assim, muito importantes e cujo pensamento ilumina muito do que a gente faz aqui no Instituto. A professora Lilia Schwarcz, antropóloga, professora, e a professora Ariella, que da aula da Universidade de Brown, e conseguiu encaixar entre as aulas uma vinda relâmpago ao Brasil e está muito interessada, inclusive, em conhecer melhor um pouco as imagens brasileiras e um pouco da história do país. Então, é isso. Rapidamente agradecer, e acho que a Lilia vai conduzir a fala. A Ariella vai falar por alguns minutos, e aí depois a gente vai entabular uma conversa com perguntas do público, tá bom? Então, muito obrigado e boa conversa para todos.
Boa noite a todas, a todos, a todos. Uma alegria estar aqui. Muito obrigado, Tiago, ao MS, ao Instituto Goethe, pelo convite. Sobretudo, obrigado para a Ariella Azoulay pela oportunidade de estar aqui conversando com testemunhas agora, não é? Nós vamos organizar dessa maneira. Eu vou só introduzir a professora e depois ela vai falar 20 minutos em torno do artigo que ela publica na ZUM. E depois, na sequência, eu tenho algumas questões, mas acho que a Mariana está por aqui, então vocês vão receber papel e lápis, então, por favor, mandem as suas questões, que eu vou tentar juntar as minhas questões com as questões que vocês forem enviando. Bom, falando um pouquinho da Ariella. A Ariella é escritora, curadora, cineasta, teórica da fotografia e também de cultura visual. Ela é professora de cultura moderna e mídia no Departamento de Literatura Comparada da Universidade de Brown. Foi formada pela Universidade de Paris 8, na École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales e também em Tel Aviv University. Ela começou a lecionar em Bar-Ilan University, em Israel, em 1999, e em 2010 ela teve seu tenure recusado por motivações políticas. Desde 2010, ela foi Visiting Professor at the Human Rights Center of the University of Connecticut. Em 2011, atuou como Researcher Professor at the ZUM University. E atualmente, como eu disse, ela é professora na Universidade de Brown. A Ariella, ela vai nos falar depois sobre isso, mas ela rejeita a sua cidadania israelense por sua identificação com a causa palestina. Ela vai nos explicar melhor isso. Eu gostaria de mencionar alguns livros que a Ariella publicou. Death Showcase, The Power of Images in Contemporary Democracy, de 2001. The Civil Contract of Photography, de 2008. From Palestine to Israel, A Photographic Record of Destruction of State Formation, também de 2011. Civil Imagination, A Political Ontology of Photography, de 2011. Com Adi Ophir, seu marido, companheiro, This Regime Which Is Not One, de 2011, também com Adi Ophir, The One State Condition. E depois, Different Ways Not to Say Deportation, de 2013. Ali ela entende a fotografia, como vocês vão ver, como resultado de um encontro, e eu diria também de um desencontro, entre o fotógrafo, o objeto, né, o sujeito fotografado, o espectador e a câmera, que não podem ser redutíveis a nenhum desses eixos. O trabalho dela, a questão da agência, também daquele que é fotografado, é muito importante. Ela lida com a noção de império, numa perspectiva que rompe com uma certa temporalidade e com uma certa espacialidade, e tem, sobretudo, uma perspectiva muito importante para nós, né, brasileiros, muitas vezes ainda tomados por esse problema, né? A nossa imaginação continua muito europeia, né? Os nossos museus, as nossas instituições, muito marcados por um viés colonial, e é um pouco nesse local que a Ariella tem nos inspirado tanto e produzido de uma maneira tão importante. Então, deixo vocês agora. Ariella, esqueci de comentar, ela até vai começar por isso, que ela tem uma produção fílmica importante, cito alguns: The Food Chain, 2010, The Angel of History and Civil Alliance, de 2012. Ariella agora. Muito obrigada.
thank you, Lily, for a very generous introduction, and thank you, Tiago and Ronnie, for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here. And let me start with I will start with 2 minutes from a film that I just finished, the first part of it. It's one of a trilogy, and then I will continue from there. Can we turn off the lights?
It is no secret that millions of objects never intended for museum display have been looted from all over the world by different imperial powers. It is no secret that many of them have been carefully preserved in pristine museums and are now seen as precious art objects. At the same time, it is no secret that millions of people robbed of tools, masks, and other objects that constituted their world continue to seek a place where they can rebuild their homes. Not only do they have rights to these objects, their rights are inscribed in them. Imagine these were the people calling for help. Alternately, imagine that these figures had not been robbed of the people who made them.
How can I get to that? Sorry, I work with Mac, so it seems like a completely different platform for me. Okay, thank you. Thank you. I think that we can turn off a little bit the light, not completely. So I wanted to start with these 2 minutes for my film, just to give you the context of how I think about photography and how I address the world that we are living in, which was shaped by imperialism. So we have, on the one hand, objects that are being very well taken care of in museums, and on the other hand, we have people who are called undocumented. And rather than relating to these people as undocumented under different regimes, they are called differently sometimes, I relate to those objects that were looted from them as their documents. And when we see asylum seekers, or when we see homeless, or when we see all this population that was deprived, that is deprived for many of the privileges or the rights that citizens enjoy from, I invite you actually to think about them in relation to the very well documented objects that are kept in museums and are made available to us as scholars, as artists, and as citizens in general. So how this is related to photography. So what created this kind of split between very well documented objects and undocumented people is the technology of the shutter. The technology of the shutter, we tend to relate to it as one of the components of the camera, as if the camera is based on this idea of the shutter that works repetitively and actually differentiate between what will be inscribed and what will not be inscribed. And when I'm speaking about the technology of the shutter as an imperial technology that started with the beginning of imperialism at the end of the 15th century, I'm relating to this technology that deprived people of what they had: lands, resources, objects, beliefs, and more than that. So let me start with this image, or these two images, where you see the map. You see the map plays a role here in this image when Cabot asks for permission, actually, or convinced first through the map that there is something there to be explored or exploited. And here we see, why it doesn't show when I'm moving? Okay, sorry. And here in this image you see how the map is already translated into a plan. And not only into a plan, it is endowed with certain imperial rights, because this guy will get the authorization by the king to explore other lands. And here what we see that the map is not only an image, the map is a set of imperial rights. And these imperial rights are the rights that enable the people who exercise them to separate people from what they have, usually people in other lands, but not only. So even when we are speaking about the map, I don't relate to it only as an image, I relate to it as an image as part of a series of rights. So what I'm trying to suggest in this series of essays that was published now in ZUM is that photography didn't start, like we are being told, in the 1830, but was actually started in 1492. Started together with imperialism based on this technology of the shutter. So let's look at it closely. At the moment when photography was already performed, I would say, by the state, here we are at a moment that is studied by many scholars of photography as the beginning of photography, when photography was defended, advocated by Dominique François Arago in Paris in the Académie des Sciences. So let's read closely what he says. While these pictures are exhibited to you, these pictures he relates to the photographs, everyone will imagine the extraordinary advantages which could have been derived from so exact and rapid means of reproduction during the expedition to Egypt. So what we have in this discourse by Arago about photography is that actually photography will enable us to colonize better. And he refers to the Napoleonic expedition, but as we know very well, with the Portuguese, with the Spanish, it started way earlier than the late 18th century. And here you have just one image depicting the expedition of Napoleon, and it is crucial for our understanding of photography, of this dissociation between people and objects. And when I'm speaking about the dissociation of people from objects or from their resources, I'm also relating to photography as a technology of extraction that will dissociate people from the photograph to come. So when we are speaking about the imperial projects of appropriating others' wealth, we are speaking also about the appropriation of future wealth. Otherwise, the inequality that we see today after 500 years of imperialism will not be as big as we know them. So the way that I relate to photography is as a technology of extraction that actually extracted what I call a visual wealth from other people that served as the raw material. Because as all of you know, photography cannot take place without the photographed persons or without the objects that will be taken by the camera. So there is a need for resources in order to generate all this wealth, millions and zillions of images in archives, in libraries, and in museums. So here, if we look for a second at this moment that Arago relates to, at the moment that is considered the birth of photography, what we see are several things. First of all, we see that the mummies are about to be exposed, to be opened up. So we see here the violence of imperialism, which is to take objects that should not be given to the gaze and to open them up under this ideology that they should be recorded, they should be documented, they should be salvaged, they should be rescued. All these are imperial rights, because not everybody, not every community believed that its objects should be fragmented and be exposed to the gaze of others. So let's go back for a second to Arago's speech and continue from where I left it. everyone will realize that had we had photography in 1798, we, and who is this we? It's of course this minority of imperial citizens that are not only French citizens but from other imperial power. We would possess today faithful pictorial records of that which learned world is forever deprived by the greed of the Arabs and the vandalism of certain travelers. So here we see in action, I would say, how the Arabs are being degraded and the Europeans are being depicted or creating their self-image as those who salvage others' culture. To copy the millions of hieroglyphs which cover even the exterior of the great monuments of Thebais, Memphis and Karnak, and others would require decades of time and legions of draftsmen. By the daguerreotype, one person would suffice to accomplish this immense work successfully. And I would like to call your attention to this closing sentence, which is really crucial to understand how photography was envisioned immediately as an imperial project. The question is how to accumulate more, how to be able to do faster the work of one draftsman, which means how to extract more photographs from what is out there as a resource that is given to those who are collecting it. So let me continue to one of the images, the Napoleonic expedition, and Edward Said wrote about it in length, generated several volumes of images because he went there, Napoleon, with a battalion of 500 draftsmen, engineers, and other people who extracted knowledge and technologies from the Egyptian. And you can see here, what you see are very well drafted objects, which means very well documented objects through drawings. And this will lead me immediately to the very well preserved objects in museums. So in the same way that in the Napoleonic expedition, drawing is the medium to generate these objects, but what you see here are of course fragments of culture. And once you fragment culture, you can collect it, you can start to catalog it and to own it. Here what we see is a photograph of an object. So what we have here is to see how these transition from maps, images, objects, and photographs, all of them are being very well taken care of, very well documented, while people are going through genocides, through enslavement, through partition, and on and on and on, all the other imperial catastrophes. So why do I bring this necklace that is preserved at the British Museum? In order to explain something about why I reject this paradigm under which photography was understood as its origins are in the 1830s, a new modern technology that produces images and is accounted for in the context of the history of images, as if it is only a better modality to create images. This is the history that I reject, and when I think about photography as its origin in the 1490s, I'm speaking about photography as another imperial technology that enables a kind of large-scale dissociation of people from their different resources. And as I said, we are speaking about objects, lands, and images, and their extraction. So here you see one of the necklaces extracted from Zulu people in South Africa, already as its record in the museum. And here you see a photograph, and you can see, of course, the relationship between the photograph and the necklace that is the series of necklaces that were extracted from the Zulu people when these kind of photographs were taken. So rather than relating to this kind of photograph in the way that the critic of ethnographic collections think about them, as if these people were invited or forced to pose in their traditional costumes and traditional objects, while they were modern, as if being modern is a kind of advantage, or as if it is something that we have to dream about rather than one of imperialism weapons, I am relating to this kind of photograph in continuity with the violence of several imperial powers. And we are speaking about the Boers, we are speaking about the British, who forced the Zulu people, who were one of the strongest kingdom in South Africa, forced them to open up. So this practice of opening up generated these kind of photographs that are not just epistemological violence against the photographed person that is forced to appear with traditional, as if traditional is a pejorative term, but it is a photograph that was taken at the moment that all this material wealth of these people was appropriated into Western museums. So what I'm trying to do is also to think about photographs in relation to those objects. And here you have another photograph that was taken in Congo by Hotot, who was a French ethnographer, and just very briefly to read from the way that he depicted his expedition. The figure was clothed in ample red robes, fixed at the neck. We removed its garment. We removed, of course, because why did they remove? Because they wanted to get into the object. They wanted to access the pure object. So everything else had to be removed. In the same that when a photograph has to be taken, everything else has to be removed, and this is the operation of the technology of the shutter. So they removed the garments to get a photograph of the carving. Having taken my photograph, I realized that the village, which previously had been very animated, was hushed and deserted. But we were being observed behind the huts by a few of the villagers. So he is completely aware of the violence act that he is performing, because the villagers are afraid, they are hiding, and he knows that he penetrates their houses, as you can see here, against their will, in order to appropriate the object and at the same time to take photographs of the object. And this is not limited only to Congo at the 15th, 16th, 17th, and the beginning of the 20th century when we are speaking about Hotot. Let me show you another moment that is considered to be the origin of photography, but to show it from the same perspective. This is an installation for the panorama of Alger that was generated in 1832, and Algeria was conquered by the French in 1830, and the guy, the Colonel Charles Langlois, who took these images with his camera obscura. We are speaking a moment before the invention of the device, as I said, not of the imperial technology. He took these images, and what interests me in these images, and this is why I bring it in the same sequence of Zulu, Congo, and Algeria, is the reversal of the point of view. If you look at maps of Algeria, you're looking at Algeria from the sea to the town. Just very briefly, I'm showing you 3 maps. Let me go back to this image. And this image, as you can see, is this series of images had been produced from the inside looking at the sea, which means the French army is already in the city, and the camera obscura guy or the camera obscura operator is able to penetrate the city with the army, with the military force. They open up the city and to document the city from inside in order actually to help the military to conquer other parts of the city. So what we see here is at the same time the collusion between military technology and these technologies that are allegedly technology of producing images, but actually these are technology that enable or authorize those who are exercising them to exercise themselves imperial rights, because he has the right now to penetrate into houses in Algeria and to participate in enabling the French power to conquer the entire city. So let me move from this image to another series of images that were taken in Algeria, and of course I could pick up many other places. And rather than looking at these images of ruins or of very precious buildings, I would like you to call your attention to the same imagery that we saw in the Napoleonic expedition, this fragmentation of cultures. So what you see here is the fragmentation of Algiers into precious objects, which are buildings, being taken in photographs that are being commercialized and circulated through postcards in between different colonies. And rather than looking at these images and seeing in them images of precious buildings or buildings that were preserved, I am calling your attention to look at each and every image of a single building as an image of destruction, because the environment around this building had to be destroyed for this building to emerge to your eyes as a single precious building. So the movement from these kind of images of destruction, and I think that we have to change our way to look at photograph and to ask what the photograph that we are looking at actually destroyed at the moment that they were taken. From this image, it's very easy later on to locate images of destruction, and this is an image of destruction that was depicted by the same guy who used the camera obscura, and this is several decades or 1 century later by the French in Alger, how they destroyed the city, and you can see how they created a very large vein for the French imperial power to be in the city. And as I said, each and every point on the global map that we will touch, we will see repeating at different moments this kind of 1492 as the beginning of forcing cultures to be opened up. So here I brought another example because it is a very crucial example, I think, today when the discourse of restitution takes place, and the case of Benin is a very clear case where 5,000 objects were looted from the palace in Benin at the end of the 19th century by the British, and they are claiming these objects from that very moment. But when now there is this Sarcevoir report generated in France, and Macron, the president of France, who commended this report, is now going to bury it, I think that it is very important to understand these processes that I'm speaking about, these imperial technologies, in order to understand that when we think about photography in the context of 500 years, we have not only the right to reject imperial temporality that tells us when things start and that they will never end, which means capitalism is here forever. Racial capitalism is here forever. Imperialism is here forever. Rather than this temporality of allegedly progress that cannot be stopped, everything is unavoidable, imagining 1492 as the beginning enable us to imagine that we can stop this catastrophe that is called imperialism because it is reversible. Because we have to think about our extra or excess of rights in relation to the denial of rights of others. So rather than thinking in the humanitarian mode and expecting from photographs to change the world, or expecting from photographs to continue to document the plight of others, we have to think about them as the exercise of extra rights that should be reversed. So let me, do I still have some time? So let me move to also a very well-known image, which is the Scramble of Africa, which was at the Berlin Conference or the Congo Conference, when the imperial powers got together in Berlin and divided Africa like trophy among themselves. And I bring it not only for what it was, which itself deserves 3 hours of discussion at least, but I bring it in order to move to this notion of the engaged photographer, or to this notion of social photography, or to this notion of humanitarian or humanistic or human photography, which I'm actually trying to undermine its basis, because I think that it is premised on this set of imperial rights that are endowed to photographers who are being invited with the military to open up other cultures and to exercise documentary photography, which I consider to be an imperial ideology. Why do I consider it to be an imperial ideology? Because photography, the way that is understood as based on the device of photography, is considered to be a technology that enables us to take pictures of what is out there. But what is out there was not out there before the imperial intervention that fragmented cultures, that destroyed cultures, that replaced thriving communities with big gaps of inequality, and that extracted so many resources of the world that brought the world to the place of a catastrophic warming. So the photographer that was endowed with these rights was endowed with these rights with the ideology that the photographer is going there to sites of catastrophe, and the photographer will bring images. But where do these images are going? They are going to the same, metropolis where the people that are sending their army are living, where the people who are sending the soldiers of the IMF or the World Bank in order to drain Africa or India or all these other places, they are being sent from the same cities where these photographs are being accumulated, allegedly with the good intention of witnessing what is going on elsewhere. And just to illustrate this with post-World War II, tradition of humanistic photography, here you have books by George Roger, you have books by Robert Capa, by Chim, by Henri Cartier-Bresson, all these photographers of Magnum that was created with the ethos of a different news agency, but actually let me read you something that will relate it to the scramble of Africa and will make the connection, I hope, very clear. In those days, post-World War II, a photographer had a significant advantage. Large areas of the world had hardly ever seen a photographer. So it's the advantage of the photographer, right? There are zones to explore. There is a capital to accumulate for a photographer because there are zones that were not yet explored. They could choose to go almost anywhere they wanted, as Roger pointed out, because in the early days, one could take pictures of just about anything, and magazines were clamoring for it. Magnum's first move was to divide the world, rather loosely, into flexible areas of coverage, with Chim in Europe, Cartier-Bresson in India and the Far East, Roger in Africa, and Capa at large, and replacing Bill Vanderlitt in America, etc., etc. So you see the connection between the distribution of the world post-World War II and the distribution of Africa during the Berlin Conference. So what I try to show is different procedure through which photographers participate in this opening up of zones with the ideology that what is there should be seen, what is there should be documented. But there were so many societies that didn't believe in the documentation of each and every thing that they had, because in order to document, you have to break it down, you have to fragment it, you have to appropriate it, and then you can also sell it, and then you can trade with it, and then we know what happens to lands, indigenous lands, all around the world. So just to show you two more photographs before I will conclude what I wanted to present tonight. These two images that were taken and published in Paris Match at the moment of the first World Festival of Black Arts in Dakar in '66. Both of them are trying to violate, or not trying, are violating many of the beliefs that were not yet violated. So what happened in the first World Festival, and this will connect you again, objects and photographs, is that many Western museums lended to Dakar objects that were looted from Africa. So rather than restituting them and giving them back, they lended them for a few months in order to be shown in Africa. And when they have been shown by local people in Senegal For example, you have the photographer who took the photograph here, and the caption at Very Much says, "Until today, women who see these fetishes were punished with this." So not only the photographer and the editor do not understand anything about the role of objects and when it is not allowed to be seen. It's not necessarily as a already accomplished object. It is most of the time during their preparation. But if we follow their logic, what the photograph is doing is violating actually or endangering the woman if she's under a death threat. Why to show this photograph? And why to make the spectator complicit with this violation? So what matters here, and this is why I bring this in the next photograph, is that all the media is mobilized in order to corrupt the spectator to collaborate with this exposure of people to either their very, in quotation mark, backward beliefs or to their endanger. And here in another photograph that I darken it because I didn't want to fully expose it. This photo is a tour de force. No one has the right to see a dancer while he takes off the mask, and of course this tour de force is the performance of this violation. So from this I would like to end with two images because I don't have enough time. I would like to end with two images from Palestine because as Professor Lilia Schwarcz presented me at the beginning, I was born in Israel. I didn't renounce on my passport because you cannot live without passports in this world, but I would not let the state to define who I am. I am in an effort to define what is the state, and rather than think about this state as the state of Israel, I would like to see it as Palestine, as it was before Palestine was destroyed and Israel was erected as a monument. And here what you see in this photograph, and these are photographs that are from protests that are taking place in Gaza, in the border with Israel, since March 2018, every Friday, but actually every day, where Palestinians are trying to approach their land. They are trying to approach Palestine, which is called Israel and is completely fortified with borders. And the photographers are there because they are not disconnected from their communities and they are not acting as middlemen for others because they are living in what is, I think, that we should call, and others are calling, the ghetto of Gaza. They are part of their community, so they are not taking from the outside photographs of protest. They are themselves part of the protest. As themselves they are part of the protest, they are lacking the immunity that the capitalist market is giving to photographers who have the right to roam around in other places of disasters and are being expected in the West to come back with their photographs. So here what you see is a photograph from the Palestinian photojournalist that was targeted by the state of Israel. Israel target photojournalists every week. 2 or 3 are being shot, either being killed or being hardly wounded. And here they are evacuating him. And as you can see, photographers are part of the situation, and the guy who is being evacuated is a photographer. And here what you see is photographers trying to mobilize their power together and to strike against, not only against the power of the state, but to use their profession, to use photography as a union and to strike against this notion of the photographer that has no right actually to claim his homeland in this case. So maybe I will stop here and I'll be happy to continue the conversation.
Muito obrigada, Ariella, belíssima palestra. Nós vamos só continuar com ela. Eu vou destacar alguns aspectos do seu artigo e do seu trabalho para você poder desenvolver um pouquinho.
Just a second, I don't hear.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe I have to. No, okay, I hear you, but
Can you?
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, super. Okay. E também eu quero lembrá-los de mandar as questões. Nós temos aqui ainda quase 40 minutos para fazer essa conversa.
Sorry, nothing.
Nothing is
Do
coming.
you hear?
Do we have someone that can help us here? Não está ali.
No.
You don't have it.
I had it earlier.
Yeah, I remember that. It was working. Tem alguém? Ok. Shots.
Just a second, Ariella. They're checking.
Okay.
We have to check. We are going to wait here. For a while. Thank you so much. It's working now? Yeah? Ok, então vamos lá. Então, Ariella, só continuando aqui o que você acabou de dizer sobre o papel dos fotógrafos, mais propriamente dito, no seu trabalho e no artigo que você publica agora na ZUM, você chama a atenção para que se a fotografia é parte de um projeto imperial e, portanto, não universal, ela também é subserviente a esse projeto. Essa ideia de subserviência é muito importante no seu artigo. Eu gostaria que você falasse um pouco mais dela, porque a ideia de ser subserviente ao projeto imperial, ela é oposta à ideia desse fotógrafo heróico, isolado, que vai, de alguma maneira, de encontro a essas populações. Você poderia falar um pouquinho mais sobre esse aspecto subserviente do fotógrafo?
Yes, sure. Thank you. Should I read this now? Yeah. So what I'm trying to say is that it is typical of imperialism that imperial actors also criticized, the regime, while those against whom violence was exercised were out of the game. The same with photography. Photographers agreed for a very long time to take photographs of others, to consider themselves as moral subjects, and to shout that a catastrophe is being taken place elsewhere, but to go with their photographs to make their life elsewhere. So I think that this kind of dissociation, not only we have to acknowledge it, but we have also to understand it in the context of 500 years. Because when photography was invented, the world was already destroyed. Destroyed, I don't mean completely, because if it would have been completely destroyed, we would not be here, but was impaired or was damaged. And many of the other formations that existed in the world were already destroyed. Millions were already kidnapped, for example, from Africa and were enslaved in different places, like the place where we are, in the US, in the island. Hundreds of thousands of women in Europe were massacred under the pretext of witch hunts. Many places, their culture was destroyed in order to make room for imperial structures. So photography, when it was invented in the 19th century, the world was already organized with an imperial logic. There were all the time resistance to it, but this is the way that the world was organized. So they were endowed with privileges to get to different places and to come back with a moral discourse. And I think that this kind of double standard, we have to undermine it. We have to deconstruct it. And it doesn't mean that there were no all-the-time photographers who had very well intentions, but very well intentions is not enough. When the world is destroyed and we participate in the destruction, we have to ask, what are we doing? And this is why I ended with this example of unions of photographers. I think that it's not about a question of a single photographer. So what can I do? I don't know what you can do, and I don't know what I can do. I just know that we can always think about or imagine how to use our power, for example, as experts in different domains, in order to collaborate with others, in order to think what are the rights that we are exercising in excess.
Você no seu artigo também, além de tratar além de tratar desse papel dos fotógrafos, papel subserviente dos fotógrafos, você também analisa a recepção dos primeiros críticos da fotografia, como Walter Benjamin, que viram na fotografia a abertura para um novo mundo, não só uma nova tecnologia, mas para um novo mundo. No artigo você destaca muito o que eles não viram. Você poderia falar um pouco do que esses primeiros críticos não viram a respeito da fotografia? Eu me refiro aos críticos de fotografia, os que comentaram as fotografias.
Yeah, so thank you for this question. You know, I started, I think, my research on photography 2 decades ago, and I was inspired by Walter Benjamin. And I think that I was really inspired by one of the very famous sentences in his essay on photography, that photography shaped our perception, redefined our perception. And it took me years to understand what I understood in relation to Walter Benjamin and in relation to many other white philosophers, is that they actually didn't question the imperial project that their own countries ran. And when I'm thinking about what really impacted the perception, I think that seeing millions of people being kidnapped and enslaved, it is much stronger impact on the perception than being immersed with millions of photographs. So rather than understanding photography, again, as a technology that produces images, and everybody speaks about the speed, and today we are completely surrounded by images, as if this impacted our perception. I think that seeing every day the world being destroyed, you go outside and you see, you know, another neighborhood is being destroyed for gentrification, or you see other 100,000 people being deported from one place to another. This impacts our perception much more than being exposed to photographs. And I think that Benjamin was unable to see it because he didn't look at the imperial context of the regime, of the place where he lived. He looked at other things that are related to the place where he lived. He looked at the Nazi regime, but again, speaking about the Nazi regime as dissociated from 500 years of imperialism is very problematic. It creates the exceptionality of the Holocaust, it creates the exceptionality of the Nazi regime, and it actually normalizes all the other imperial regimes that continue to destroy the world through the UN, through UNESCO, which is a project of salvation, through the World Bank that gives loans in order to destroy more, and through the IMF and all these other international organizations. Sorry.
Ariella, você acabou de mencionar o termo normalização, né? Dizendo que Benjamin normalized. No seu trabalho, em geral, há uma crítica muito forte à fotografia como um processo de criação do outro, e mais do que isso, um processo de normatização e também de naturalização do outro. Você poderia falar um pouco mais desses seus conceitos, que não houve tempo de falar na sua palestra?
There is violence here because these people were modern, but this is not seen in the photographs. I think that we see so much other things in these photographs. To begin with, the performance of the photographed persons, the way that they are exercising their presence in the photograph, that I don't want to dump these photographs and to say that the photographer has an extra power on the photographed person. I like to understand the practice of photography on a very large scale, which is as a practice of extraction. So this is why it is not about the way that one photographer take a photograph of one photographed person. It is about what happened with this technology of extraction that created photography as a resource for the production of wealth. And when we look at this wealth and we ask, where is it? Getty, Alamy, all these museums in Europe, in the US. I'm not saying that there are no other museums in other places, but the division of the wealth is very similar to the division of other forms of capital. So we have to cease to relate to photography only from the perspective of single photographs or only from the perspective of the photographers, and to understand what happened through this accumulation. And if we understand what happened through this accumulation, we can address photographers and ask them, expect from them to use their power to revoke the rights of those states in these photographs in order, for example, to make collapse the project of surveillance. Surveillance on mass scale cannot happen without this raw material of photographs. The photographers still have some rights in this photograph. They can use their power not to be the individual hero that has the right to go somewhere else and to report, but to unionize and claim their rights against imperial powers.
Bom, vamos continuar aqui nessa mesma toada. Combinamos aqui que nós não vamos acabar com a fotografia nem com...
I don't hear the translation.
Again.
Can you try again?
Ok, vamos lá.
No.
No, it's not working.
Okay.
Ok, it's working now. Ok. Então, nós vamos combinar aqui que nós não queremos nem acabar com a fotografia, tampouco com os fotógrafos, certo? Então, o que eu queria aprofundar um pouco com você é essa sua noção de que o imperialismo criou um programa visual, né? E que nesse programa visual as fotografias entram a partir dessa capacidade metonímica, né? E acabam cumprindo um papel fundamental nesse processo, nesse verdadeiro programa visual. Há também um aspecto importante que eu gostaria que você desenvolvesse, é que nesse programa visual é possível dizer que os fotógrafos tiveram um projeto de racialização das imagens, não é? Racialização pensada nos diferentes pontos do nosso planeta. Seria possível falar um pouquinho mais sobre esse projeto de racialização das imagens?
Yeah, so I would like, on the one hand, to relate to work that was done about, different projects of racialization through photography, which is the way that the images of people are being produced and being racialized. But I would like to relate to it in a larger scale, which is in the context of 500 years of imperialism. The imperial project racialized the world in a way that we see less the white, and we see more those who became victims of white enterprises. So what we see is that photography was mobilized into this ideology that imperial crimes are being written in the bodies of the victims, rather than trying to ask, what are imperial crimes? Because if we ask the question, what are imperial crimes, it is not only what is done to victims, it is the excess of rights that they are exercising. So, but photography didn't allow photographers to account for their imperial rights. So when I'm speaking about photography participating in the project of the racialization, is first of all as the images that are produced out of moments of imperial violence, they show us mainly the body of the victims that are usually non-white bodies. And on the other hand, when I'm speaking about the way that photography participated in the racialization of the world, I'm speaking about the shutter that divided populations from their resources and from their objects and left them at the edge of being propertyless or worldless. And photographers just materialized in images this state of being already racialized by imperialism, and they came to document as if it is natural that these people are being propertyless and at the verge of being worldless.
Então aqui vou ler uma pergunta vinda do público que é uma provocação também. Como saber o que e quando não fotografar?
I think that there is no recipe for that. And not only there is no recipe for that, we have a history of moments when people decided what to do that can give sometimes examples, but sometimes there are the wrong examples. I think that this is something that should be considered every time anew. There are no recipes for that.
Unfortunately, no.
But not only there are no recipes, I don't think that being present in such difficult situation is limited only to the question of taking or not taking a photograph.
Então eu vou juntar uma pergunta do público com uma pergunta minha nesse mesmo sentido. pergunta que veio do público diz o seguinte: em um contrato civil, você descreve a fotografia como resultado de um encontro entre fotógrafo, objeto, espectador e câmera. Como você enxerga o lugar da fotografia contemporânea e as formas de produção e circulação de imagens que não resultam desse encontro? E eu vou juntar mais uma pergunta a essa. Nesse local multifocado do fotógrafo, da produção da fotografia, do comitente, há também o lugar daquele que é fotografado. Como é possível pensar na agência daquele que é fotografado e que é transformado num corpo silencioso, num corpo anônimo?
I see why you connect these two questions. The photographed persons, like other people, are active in any situations. There is no situations when people are completely non-active unless they are close to being denied of any rights to be active and to breathe. So I am assuming that the photographed person was always active in the situation of photography when the situation of photography could be tracked down. But when we are completely surrounded by surveillance camera, for example, we cannot track down the situation of being taken in a photograph, right? Mm-hmm. But when we go back to the beginning of photography, also there were many situations where we couldn't claim the possibility to be present in the moment when the photograph had been taken. So rather than thinking about this as a transition from one era to another, I would like more to relate to it to different situations that existed since the very beginning of photography and exist today. Today we are surrounded by cameras that deprive from us even this minimum of encounter with the photographer. But at the beginning of photography also, there were many situations like this. Alongside these situations back then and today, there are situations where we are engaged in the photographic situation, but this doesn't mean that we can dominate it, neither on behalf of the photographer nor on the behalf of the photographed person. So rather than thinking about photography as a domain completely apart, I think that through photography we have the possibility to imagine the way that the imperial world can be reversed. In order for the imperial world to be reversed, we have to claim that we want to go backward. What does it mean to go backward? We want to renegotiate the excess of rights alongside the denial of rights of others. It means that we don't want to relate to photographs as standing for themselves as precious objects of museums. And let me just give an example because I think it's illustrated in a very poignant way. Tamara Lanier, she is the descendant of Renty Taylor, an enslaved person who was kidnapped from Congo and was brought to the US and was enslaved in the South. His photograph was taken in a collaboration of several white men, starting by Agassiz, who founded the Harvard School of Science in Boston, and Morton, another ethnographer, and a few others. Agassiz also did a series of photographs here of enslaved people. This is why I mentioned this example. And this daguerreotype, part of a series of daguerreotype, is held by Harvard Museum, Harvard University and Museum as its own property. Tamara Lanier tracked herself as being the great-great-daughter of Renty Taylor, and she asked the restitution of this daguerreotype to the family. So Harvard completely denied this genealogy and doubted that she is really the great-great-daughter and refused to talk with her. Now she filed a lawsuit against Harvard, and we have to wait and to see what will happen. But in the meantime, until we will see what the legal system will issue as a verdict, I think that we as a community engaged with photography, we have to endorse this claim and to say that photographs are not only the precious objects to be collected and preserved in museums under the right temperature. When she was interviewed by different media and by different photography curators, people asked her with a kind of fear, but what will you do with the daguerreotype if you will get it? Don't you think that it will be better in the museum? And the question is, of course, who would ask you if you want to give the photograph of your grandfather because you are incapable to preserve it yourself? And I think that we have not only to endorse this lawsuit, but we have also to say that she has the right to destroy this daguerreotype, which, by the way, I don't believe that this is what she will do. But we have to stop relate to objects as very precious, very well documented, and should be preserved at the expenses of people. And this is, I think, part of the project that as people who are engaged with photography, we have to be part of today, rather than thinking about how to take a better photograph, how to interpret better a single photograph. There is a lot to do in relation to the way that we collaborated with the institutionalization of photography as reducible to individual photographs, that museums or state have the right to preserve them at the expenses of people from whom they were taken.
Bom, o Brasil também tem no contexto do segundo reinado, ou seja, nos anos que Dom Pedro II era o imperador do Brasil, um fotógrafo suíço radicado nos Estados Unidos, Agassiz, amigo do imperador, ele contratou um fotógrafo tal para tirar uma série de fotografias e que estão em Harvard. Então a situação é muito paralela, né? Não é muito distante. Mas eu gostaria de continuar com a questão da fotografia e a sua discussão.
Let's hope that someone in Brazil will claim, you know, their rights in these photographs produced by
eu espero que a gente faça um bom uso dessas fotografias e que a gente possa discutir etnicidade, que a gente possa discutir de onde vêm essas personagens. Enfim, de tempos em tempos, Harvard nos concede essas fotografias, mas acho que é importante que elas estejam também circulando aqui nesse lugar, né? Mas vamos em frente. Acho que você sabe, conversávamos sobre isso um pouco antes, que o Brasil carrega uma grande perversidade, porque a fotografia entrou muito cedo no Brasil, com os experimentos do Hercule Florence, e, como você também sabe, o Brasil foi o último país a abolir a escravidão. Eu não me refiro a qualquer escravidão, ainda existe escravidão no mundo, mas foi o último país a abolir a escravidão moderna. Qual é a perversidade? Com isso, o Brasil tem talvez o maior, você me corrija, o maior catálogo de imagens de escravizados e escravizadas, né? Também de negros livres, libertos, enfim, que existe, não é? Essas fotografias, muitas estão aqui, por exemplo, na coleção do Instituto Moreira Salles, né? Como estão na Biblioteca Nacional, né? Como estão na coleção brasiliana, né? Vamos falar agora, já que você trabalha sempre com essa ideia de reverso, né? Qual seria o papel reverso desses museus que abrigam essas coleções, no sentido de descolonizar, decolonizar as suas próprias coleções?
To hire 100 descendants of these people who were enslaved to deal with this collection.
Vou ler aqui uma pergunta do público. Seria possível relacionar a superabundância das imagens no mundo contemporâneo a uma produção de subjetividade ainda bastante ligada ao modernismo e ao iluminismo, que privilegiam a apreensão e percepção do mundo por meio de formas de representação e soterram outros saberes perceptivos como interações e processos de sensação? Deu para entender? Could you understand?
I think so. I don't think that there is one reason why. I think that maybe this ideology called Enlightenment contributed in a way to this excess. But one thing that I would add to this, one among many others that should be added, is that there is something about the availability of imperial technologies that invite us to use them based on the way that they were already being used. So, for example, if we are going back to this case of Louis Agassiz, this Swiss scientist who migrated to the US and established the Harvard School of Science, and came here in an expedition. So just the term of expedition is, of course, the recurrence of many other expeditions, but also when he came here and he contacted, some local people, what I'm interested in is how these projects repeat themselves and how many moments of reversibility were opened up on the way and were dismissed in a way. So there is something about imperial availability that invite all of us to operate imperial technologies. I'm not speaking about the device of the camera. Imperial technologies are everything that we are actually embedded in our life. So I think that the interpellation to generate more and more images is related to the availability of the technology. And I think that today, many of the photographs that were taken of people, for example, through this project of the engaged photography, cannot be taken. Because more and more communities opposed to the penetration of photographers to their communities to take photographs and to merchandise them or to win prizes in relation to them or to do many things about them without any return to those communities. Just read the Maasai manifesto with very clear instructions to people, for example, which photographs book not to buy because they denigrate them, how not to take them in photograph, and why to purchase photograph from the local community. So I think that this kind of ethos of the humanist photography that left many books through which, or on the basis of which, students of photography are still being taught, we should intervene in these books and we should disrupt what they created as available methodologies. And we should revise imperial printed matter. We should not let imperial printed matter survive in our libraries as sacred books of sacred photographers or sacred practices. This is why I think that what Tamara Lanier, the descendant of this African who was kidnapped from Africa and enslaved in the US, what she's trying to do is much more than just claiming the restitution of the image to her family. Actually, she's inhabiting his position who was not allowed to give his consent to this situation of photography and revokes the legality of this photograph to become the property of someone else. So I think that as many as inventive ways to stop this automatism of not only generating photographs, this was the question, but who has the right to own them, disrupting this is necessary. No less than asking how to take a photograph or when is the right moment to take a photograph. We have to proliferate those questions to all the levels of our engagement with photography.
Encontrar outras histórias também nessas fotografias, não é? Outras histórias, outras origens, outras agências, né, como você chama a atenção, não é? Bom, eu vou traduzir uma questão aqui que é uma questão muito interessante e muito ligada ao que você dizia agora, Ariella, que está associada ao fenômeno da mídia social, né? Como que a pergunta é com essa nova necessidade de dividir tudo, to share everything, enquanto viajamos, né? Isso é você consideraria uma nova face do imperialismo fotográfico? Eu ligaria não só com a social media, mas também com as novas tecnologias, não é? Do celular, ou seja, agora todos são potencialmente fotógrafos, não é?
Yeah, maybe there is nothing wrong with the possibility that everyone is a potential photographer, but I think that this is not, this is a part of the imperial projects, but I think that it's, when we ask about sharing photographs, we have to start to differentiate between images of violence or images that were extracted from others against their will, and from images that, as far as we can understand at a certain moment, and we can be wrong, do not harm others. So rather than relating to photographs on the equation that each photograph is equal to other, we have to start to differentiate between what is generated through the generation of these photographs and the circulation of these photographs. So we have to renounce on this universality that a photographer takes a photograph and the photograph then has a life of its own. We have the right to bring back some of these monsters into their bottles. And some other images we have, communities have the right to claim them back and to say, no, you have no right to show any longer these images unless if we intervene in them. And we can claim against the state that the state has no right to hold certain type of photographs because we have the rights to these photographs. We can play as much as we can in order to reverse the progress, with quotation mark, of the racial capitalist machine.
Há uma pergunta aqui sobre o novo photojournalism, 1960. A pergunta chama a atenção para esse novo dialogical journalism, que é, segundo a pessoa que pergunta, um tipo de fotógrafo que trabalha junto com o seu modelo no sentido de criar uma história. E a pergunta é se você considera que os problemas que você encontra no imperialismo fotográfico são iguais, ou você considera que esse fotojornalismo, esse novo fotojornalismo pode ser mais humano?
So first of all, everything that starts with new, New world, what is new world? New world, it means a process of destruction, right? In order to generate the new. And the imperial project is built on the new, that we are invited all the time to replace the old by the new, but the old is an invention in order for us to embrace the new. So new photojournalism is in itself a problem. And I don't think that any individual project can change what I'm trying to talk about, because I'm talking about the large scale of the practice of photography. So it's of course necessary for photographers, if they are taking photographs of other people, to engage with them. But this goes without saying. It shouldn't be new, right? It should be obvious. But this is not going to change the world. Sorry, the world is really bad and it's not enough. But it's good. I mean, it's good because you cannot do it otherwise, right? So rather than generating more heroic acts, we have, first of all, to acknowledge that we are implicated in the imperial technologies. And we have to ask ourselves how deep we are implicated in these technologies and how we can withdraw even a few steps back. But when we withdraw a few steps back and acknowledge that the photograph persons has some rights in this situation, just don't go back home and feel a hero.
Bom, nós temos...
Just to add one thing, because apparently people understand it very well, as we all understand it very well, but the machine interpolates us to write new book and to say that we are a groundworking work, rather than saying we are joining 500 years of opposition to imperialism. So I think that the question is with imperialism is that we have to struggle in order to withdraw from the positions that we inhabit as scholars, as curators, as photographers, as whatever we do in this world, as citizens. We have to withdraw from these positions, but we have to understand that we do the necessary, and the necessary is not enough.
Bom, nós estamos quase aqui terminando com o nosso tempo. Eu quero fazer uma última pergunta, que está relacionado ao nosso... Eu já não posso falar novo tempo, porque já vi que a Ariella não gosta de nada novo. Mas, de toda maneira, vivemos um momento que não é novo, né? Um momento muito autoritário globalmente, não é? Um momento o que nós temos chamado de democraduras, né? Que são governos que são eleitos de maneira democrática, mas não se mantêm democraticamente. E o que há em comum nessas democraturas mundiais é um uso muito alargado das imagens. Uma espécie de, não é novo, uma espécie de sequestro das imagens, né? E sequestro de certos símbolos pátrios. Como é que você sente esse momento que não é novo?
So, you know, I understand your frustration with your president. I'm from the US, and in the US we are also frustrated with our president. And I'm
Também
coming
penso
from
que o
Israel.
primeiro-ministro de Israel não é muito melhor, não é? E o presidente dos
And
Estados
I'm coming
Unidos
from
também
Israel,
não.
and we are very frustrated. So we have to acknowledge that those democracies were invented by imperial actors in the 18th century. Nothing new. We don't like Trump, we don't like Bolsonaro, we don't like Bibi, but the one before them and the one before them ran the same imperial machine that dispossessed people and eternalized the inequality. So of course we prefer some others, but we have to aspire for more. We have to aspire for a pre-colonial understanding of our life with others. There are so many people that do not participate in this idea of politics, that democracy, in the way that they were invented by the West, are not enough.
Muito obrigada, Ariella. Vamos inventar o mundo reverso, né? Bem-vindos ao velho e novo Old New World.
Pessoal, obrigado a todo mundo e até amanhã. Tem mais alguns debates aqui no auditório, tá?